I'm joined today by our CEO, Kai-leé Berke. Kai-leé and I are both former early childhood educators ourselves, and between us have had many years of experiences as teachers, caregivers of children from infancy through 5th grade, and as program administrators. We wanted to start off by thanking you for joining us this afternoon. We know how very full your days are and are appreciative to have the opportunity to spend some time with you talking about a topic that both Kai-leé and I are so passionate about, supporting the development of the whole child through meaningful inquiry. To get us started, I wanted to ask you to take 60 seconds and walk over and look out the closest window that's near you. What do you see? What do you hear? Do you see street signs? Any insects on the windowsill? What about buildings across the street that you might see? How would you describe the characteristics of that building? So take a second and then place what you see in that question box in the bottom left of your screen. And I'll share some of our responses that we're hearing. All right, so we're getting some responses here. I see stop signs. I see trees. I see birds. I see cars. I see people. I see a crossing guard. I see rain. You must be near where we are in Bethesda. I see a school bus. We wanted to take a moment to ask you to answer what you're seeing out your window, because as adults, we often walk right by these everyday scenes, paying them very little mind. But these things that you're seeing out your window are extremely interesting and exciting for young children. It's important for us to remember to take the time to look at the world through the eyes of the children in our classroom. What better way to engage children in learning than to link it with something that intrigues them? Ordinary, real-life objects that are relevant to children, like trees, buildings, sand, and insects, can inspire learning of important knowledge, skills, and behaviors.
So first and foremost, we have to start with children's interests to guide us. What do the children in your classroom find interesting? How do you know? Think about their dramatic play. What jobs do they pretend to have? What causes the buzz in the classroom with groups of children huddling together to get a closer look? What do children talk about? What questions do they ask? When you know children's interests, you have a great place to start implementing successful project-based investigations with your class. At Teaching Strategies, we call these project-based investigations. Studies are appropriate for all children, including children who are advanced learners, children with disabilities, and children who are dual language learners. Studies enable children to learn, apply, and integrate knowledge, skills, and behaviors linked to standards in all areas of development and learning. They are truly comprehensive. Children have experiences that help them develop critical process skills, such as observing, exploring, problem-solving, organizing information, communicating, and representing. And through dramatic play, their writing, and the arts, children get to represent what it is that they're learning. Doing this kind of teaching, it inspires us as educators. It respects teachers as the professionals we are, and it engages us as learners too. One of the most powerful features of this kind of project-based learning is that children have the opportunity to really develop process skills, the skills that we use to learn throughout our lives. You know, what better way for us to create a foundation for all future school success than by having children leave our classrooms with the skills they will need to be lifelong learners? We'll take a closer look at specific process skills in a few minutes. But first, let's talk a bit more about what studies look like in action. Now, in the past, the often standard approach to tying content learning together was through the use of themes, which commonly came from our experiences, ideas shared by colleagues, a letter of the week activity published guide, or those activity books that we all collected over the years, the 365 math activities, 365 language activities. Now, a common practice was to use the same themes year after year, whether or not the topic and experiences suited the interests and skills of the new groups of children. Although some themes worked well and teachers were able to implement them in a developmentally appropriate way, others weren't as appropriate for all classrooms. Now, for instance, when a teacher in Manhattan tried to use a farm theme at Back to School, even though many of the children in her class had never even set foot on a farm, the material wasn't meaningful. It wasn't relevant to children's experiences. A more meaningful way to teach content is to build on children's knowledge and interests. The strongest feature of a study is its support of children's dispositions to be curious, to explore the world around them, and to make sense of their experiences. Throughout a study, you can observe and record children's comments and questions, their involvement with materials, their successes, and their opportunities for development. Samples of children's work, photographs of their constructions, pictures of their writing can be collected as documentation and reviewed as you reflect on each child's learning. Documenting and reflecting on children's progress helps you plan for the group and for each child. All of those characteristics of a study that we just talked about, that's what differentiates it from a theme. So Brian's going to talk a little bit about how we go about selecting a good study topic.
Thanks, Kai-leé. Any successful study topic really begins with a good topic. Ideas may originate from many different sources, teachers, children, or families. The topic may center on something children are curious about, like sand. Where are the different places sand is found outside of the classroom? Can we make our own sand? They might involve a social problem. Why do we have a recycling bin? Does the trash in the bin later go somewhere else, and why? A study might evolve from something unexpected at your program, such as a leaky pipe in the kitchen. Where is all of that water coming from? No matter where the ideas come from, good study topics excite the children and generate questions that can be investigated. So let's discuss some of the questions to ask as you decide the appropriateness of a study topic. Does the topic address children's interests or potential interests? Is the topic relevant to children's experiences, and is it age appropriate? Do enough of the children have experience with the topic so they can come up with questions to investigate? Will the topic encourage children to build on what they already know? Can children explore the topic firsthand? Are there real objects that can be manipulated? Are resources available, such as people to talk with, books to read, the places to visit, and objects or living things to observe and explore? Can children do some research about this topic independently, without depending entirely on the teacher's assistance? Can the topic be explored in a variety of ways over an extended period of time? Will the topic encourage children to use literacy learning, mathematics in real-life context? Will the topic encourage children to explore important components of science and social studies? And the arts and technology be incorporated readily into the children's investigations? Does the topic lend itself to representation in a variety of media? For example, dramatic play, writing, and inner construction? Will you be able to communicate with families about the topic? Are family members likely to want to get involved in this project? Is the topic respectful of cultural differences? And lastly, is the topic worth studying?
Thanks, Brianne. Now let's consider those questions as you think about the topic of nursery rhymes. Can children explore nursery rhymes firsthand and manipulate relevant objects, making direct observations? Is the content in nursery rhymes relevant to children's everyday lives? Not so much. Is learning these songs and rhymes developmentally appropriate in the preschool classroom? Absolutely. We should certainly still share those classic rhymes that help build the home-to-school connections and teach great rhythm and rhyming. We're not saying that incorporating nursery rhymes is inappropriate for the preschool classroom. However, nursery rhymes are just not rich enough, not relevant enough to the preschool child for us to provide that rich, hands-on, those experiences that go across all important content areas. So really, therefore, they shouldn't drive the classroom curriculum. The reality is that nursery rhymes can be so fun. As we engage children in the reenactment of The Dish Ran Away with the Spoon, We can use our silly voices. We can move our bodies, incorporate props, and experiment with rhyming sounds. These rhymes have a place in the preschool classroom. Instead of becoming an isolated theme for a couple of weeks, these rhymes are something that could be woven in throughout the entire school year. That's one of the great things about a study, one of the things that I love most. Now, unlike a thematic approach in which all of the classroom instructions related to the theme for a while, not everything taking place in the classroom during a study has to be directly related to the study topic. If you're studying buildings and have a couple of children who are very interested in astronauts, you can offer opportunities for them to explore their interests during the period of the study. You talk about the study when you can really investigate it, when you can do a hands-on experiment, when children have the opportunity to manipulate objects and explore answers to their questions. But that leaves lots of other time during the day for rich and exciting learning. Now look at the list that Brian just went through with these questions that she turned it into. And think about tubes and tunnels. Are tubes and tunnels a part of children's everyday experiences? Think about straws used every day at lunch to drink milk. Think about the plumbing in your very own classroom that children engage in every day as they wash their hands or drink from the water fountain. How does that water get to them? What tubes and tunnels do children love exploring on your playground equipment? What instruments in your music and movement area are really tubes that make sound? What are the different ways that tubes can be manipulated? Think about how children can independently research and investigate the characteristics of tubes. Do you see how families could be involved? Maybe there's an older sister who plays the recorder in her third grade band and can share her instrument. Can you see opportunities for children to make and test predictions? Envision cardboard tubes, duct tape, and marbles in the toys and games area as children create their own marble runs to see how elaborate their constructions can become. Once you've decided on a topic that will provide the kinds of experiences that we just discussed, you can begin figuring out how the content might be addressed. Think about what resources you can collect and find appropriate experts and ideas for possible site visits. Don't forget to consider how families can be involved. Oftentimes, your families are your best experts. The length of a study depends on many factors, including the children's ages, their interests. Now, it's important to remember that studies run on your program's momentum, not by a calendar. But in general, a study should sustain children's interests for at least 5 or 6 weeks. Now, we have certainly seen classrooms where a study lasts 8 or 10 weeks because the children are so actively involved. While studies are flexible and evolve uniquely with each group of children, they are not without structure. In fact, every good study shares common features that enable children to develop inquiry and critical thinking skills. Every study has 3 parts: beginning the study, investigating the topic, and celebrating learning. And each part has several steps. Let's start with beginning the study. Once you've selected an exciting, engaging topic that meets the criteria that we just talked about, you're ready to introduce the topic to your class. You'll want to start by planning an exploratory investigation. Give children opportunities to explore the topic. Bring study-related artifacts into the classroom for children to touch, explore, talk about. For example, if you're implementing a study on balls, you put out a variety of balls and give children time to explore them. As children investigate the materials, observe their questions. See how they interact with the materials. Do they naturally start to sort them? How do they use them? Draw children's attention to the various characteristics of that artifact collection, in this case, that collection of balls. You'll also want to obtain background information about the topic. The more information you have about a topic, the more creative you can be in planning meaningful experiences that address important concepts. You can learn more about a topic by talking to knowledgeable people, reading, and using the internet.
After you've interacted with and observed children as they explore study-related materials, time to pause and reflect. Think about the children's level of interest and curiosity. Discuss the topic with children. Find out what children already know and record that information on a chart. And then you'll want to post it so you and the children can add to it as they make new discoveries. Then you'll want to ask children what they wonder about and what they want to find out. You'll want to list their ideas on a separate chart. And then throughout your study, children will think of new questions to add to the chart. These questions will inspire and guide future investigations of the topic. Children who have not yet been involved in the study may need your help in expressing their ideas as questions. For example, during a discussion with children about what they want to find out about balls, one child might say, "Oh, the soccer ball rolls when I kick it." So then you might respond, "The soccer ball rolls. I wonder whether all balls roll. Let's write a question on our chart. Do all balls roll?" Next, you'll want to create a web of important ideas. This is a way to think about the important study-related ideas that children could discover during the study. As part of the planning process, it's a great idea to work with other teachers to come up with a list of words related to the topic. Next, you'll organize these words into groups on chart paper and write a statement or a question that summarizes each group. These statements and questions are the important ideas that you want children to learn. For example, in a study about insects, the big ideas might include how insects move, what they eat, where they live, and how they help us, and how they change over time. Return to the web throughout the study and highlight or circle what children have explored. This will give you a visual reminder of possible investigations. Then it's time to integrate the content learning. Once you've explored the big ideas and concepts related to the topic and link them to the content you want to teach, think about experiences to offer to the children. What investigations can you plan to enable children to discover the answers to their questions? How might you integrate the topic into classroom activities? How will you address important early learning standards throughout the study? It's important to also tell families about the proposed study topic. Involve families early in the study by sending a letter or email message that explains it, inviting their participation and contributions, and suggesting things they might do at home in relation to the study. Let them know that they'll be invited to a special event at the end of the study so children can share what they did and learn. Now it's time to investigate the topic. Investigations that enable children to find answers to their questions are at the heart of a study. You'll want to organize materials and plan experiences. Think about how children might investigate the topic in interest areas, during daily routines and through group activities. Identify strategies and plan activities that will help children gain a deeper understanding of the topic, not just cute ideas related to the topic. For example, in a study about cars, children will learn much more about the topic by creating their own vehicles out of recyclable materials than they would by sponge painting car shapes on paper. Think about what children need in order to conduct their investigations. Bring together the necessary research tools like books, materials, and different types of technology. Arrange site visits and visiting experts to support children's learning. And remember, experts don't need to be people with advanced degrees related to your study topic. They're the community members with knowledge and skills that they're willing to share with children. A parent might have a weekend hobby of fixing old Chevys, or perhaps someone living near the school works at a car dealership. Inviting community members to join your classroom in the context of your study topic is so much more meaningful than having 2 weeks dedicated to reviewing all the community helpers that are out there. Plus, when we think about community helpers in the context of studies, it opens us to appreciate the value of many different roles in the community that children and adults play. For instance, in the clothes study, it's the woman who gives us 4 quarters for our dollar bill so that we can use the laundromat. In the reduce, reuse, recycle study, it's the man who collects our recycling every Tuesday morning. What would the front of our school look like if he didn't show up 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? As part of your study work, you'll likely want to organize children in small groups to investigate particular research questions. You'll want to ask open-ended questions to encourage further discoveries. Observe how children are investigating and suggest additional materials and resources. Then bring the small groups back together to share findings and give each other ideas. You want to encourage children to represent their learning through drawings, writings, diagrams, maps, graphs, collections, and constructions. Display their creations throughout the room. You might also want to share some of this documentation with families and school visitors by displaying it in your classroom entryway.
To help children be prepared for future school success, we want them to be able to critically analyze information and apply knowledge and skills across content areas in real-world situations. Right? That's the goal of preparing children for future school success and truly the goal of schooling in general. What better way to do that than with studies? Only with studies are children able to build the higher level thinking skills that they need to be successful, not just in kindergarten, but beyond. Through engaging, individualized, and hands-on experiences, we're not only supporting children's development in content areas, but we're also fostering a confidence in children that leads them on a path of lifelong learning. Let's take a look at examples of some of these process skills in action from a program in Camden, New Jersey, engaged in the study of trees. Over the course of 6 weeks, children investigated questions like, what are the characteristics of the trees in our community? Who lives in trees? How do trees change? Who takes care of trees? And as they complete these investigations, they are learning how to learn. They are developing process skills. So observing and exploring, noticing things and thinking about how, when, and why they change, manipulating objects to discover their properties and how they work, exploring different kinds of seeds, planting them, watching them grow, tending to the plants, comparing different types of leaves, investigating who might be living in that tree. All of these experiences develop children's observation skills. Connecting. That's linking new learning experiences to prior ones. The skill of connecting really anchors new learning. It puts it into a broader context, a bigger picture, and enables children to apply that new learning in a variety of situations. Again, these critical process skills are what we use as adults in learning. So if you think about when you're learning something new, you have to be able to connect it to something else in order to really be able to apply it. You can't apply new learning without making connections. Children often demonstrate their ability to make connections in their dramatic play. A teacher reading a story intentionally prompts children to make connections to prior experiences, asking how is this alike or different from their own experiences or other information that they've learned about the topic. So identifying a problem, thinking about ways to solve it, trying out solutions. Studies are rich with opportunities for problem solving. How and why did that tree fall down? Why did the tomato fall off the vine and who has been eating it? Organizing information. So breaking an idea or problem into parts, classifying and comparing. This skill makes gathering, tracking, and using information possible. The very structure of a study, organizing our thoughts over time into what do we know already about the topic, what do we want to find out about, what are we learning, is a perfect example of organizing information. And I saw on the screen a question pop up about, oh, that sounds a little bit like a KWL chart. So for those of you who are used to that, it's very similar, a way of organizing our learning over time. So we think about all of the sorting and classifying that children can do throughout a study. And I love this picture on the screen of the different tree parts. So sorting leaves, seeds, sticks by size, shape, kind, and they have tree cookies in there as well, which are so fun, the slices of a tree. And communicating and representing. This involves sharing thoughts and ideas and feelings with others in many ways. So drawing, writing, speaking, we have to be able to communicate and represent our ideas as learners. There are so many ways children themselves document and communicate their own learning over time throughout a study. I have been doing studies with children and working with teachers doing this kind of rich project-based investigations for almost 20 years. And I still love walking into a classroom doing a study. It's like a living lesson plan. Evidence of children's learning is all over the room. Another question that popped up had to do with how can I share this learning with families? Invite them into your classroom. There are charts, graphs, photos, drawings, artifacts of the study, experiments going on. Walk into a classroom mid-study and you will see a tremendous amount of evidence that children are learning these critical process skills. Yes, they are learning important literacy, mathematics, science, and social studies concepts and skills. Essential, absolutely essential. But even bigger than that, we are teaching them how to learn, and that is powerful. As early childhood educators, it is certainly our responsibility to support growth across all areas of development and learning. So here on the screen are our 38 research-based objectives that are really at the heart of all of our resources here at Teaching Strategies. As we engage children in studies, it's the teacher's role to present content in ways each child learns best. Now, learning in an early childhood classroom must be guided carefully, not left to chance. Teachers must observe what children say and do, right? We make changes to the environment, offer materials and resources that help children wonder and make sense of their experiences. And we coach children's explorations. Nothing left to chance about that. With such an emphasis in our field and in education in general on literacy, language arts, mathematics, many teachers think that they don't have time for science, social studies, social emotional development, and arts. Well, studies provide opportunities for children to apply and practice important literacy and math skills in meaningful ways as they actively investigate science and social studies topics. Studies promote the integration of technology and the arts and encourage a balance of peer collaboration and independent problem solving that supports the development of the whole child as she makes discoveries. Children use informational books to research a topic. They write signs and stories about what they observe and learn. They use math skills to gather and organize information into charts and graphs. Teachers guide children in using technology to find information and communicate with others. Children use the arts to represent their thinking and share their findings. As they work together in a classroom community, they build those positive relationships with both peers and adults. Now, children really use a wide variety of skills while investigating a study topic. And Brian's going to share some examples of what that really looks like in action in a classroom.
So here are some photographs of a classroom that was completing a study of exercise, where children not only have rich discussions about all the different types of exercise that people engage in, they also spend a good amount of time talking about how our bodies move when we exercise and the ways that we need to care for our bodies through stretching, hydration, and safety measures to ensure our bodies are protected. In this class, a mom, who's a pediatrician, came in to share with children x-rays of bones and lead a discussion on how the bones in our bodies work. Children came with their own questions to interview the doctor that would build on their prior knowledge. Later, children took that information to create their own examples of x-rays, including bones and ligaments and all of those little details. When we think about counting, tallying, and graphing, think about all the signs that you see in a 5-minute walk from your classroom door. Many of you mentioned signs that you saw at your window. Imagine taking children for a walk to count and tally the number of signs that they see. Not only will children be strengthening their counting skills, but engaging with signs and their meanings is a great opportunity to build those important emergent literacy skills through environmental prints. In a study of music making, children use standard and non-standard tools to measure the instruments in the classroom's growing collection over the study. Not only did children learn strategies for measuring and recording their findings, But they also learned new measurement vocabulary, such as circumference, diameter, and width. Children learned that the circumference of percussion instruments made an impact on the depth and volume of the sounds that they produced. While studying insects in this classroom, one of the investigation questions children explored was, how do insects change? It was that time of year in the spring for this Frederick, Maryland school when caterpillars were becoming butterflies. This teacher provided a great opportunity for children to observe this life cycle change up close. Each child had their own observational journal, and several times a week they would capture their observational drawings of the physical changes they observed the caterpillar go through as it transitioned from caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly. Not only were children learning in-depth life science, the teacher was also able to observe and scaffold children's emergent writing and fine motor skills over the span of the journal project. Gosh, what a lovely final product they had at the end to share with family members. It was so much more impactful than the sometimes more crafty representations that we'll see out there of the butterfly life cycle. While studying buildings in this Metro Nashville Early Learning Center, the class decided to transition their dramatic play area into an architecture firm, complete with blueprints, inspirational magazines, measurement tools, and samples from Home Depot. They created a space for the children to apply what they had been learning about the characteristics of buildings into their own creations of drawing plans to eventually take over to the block or art area to build into their own three-dimensional creations. Also, as part of the building study, the teacher invited children to work together to create a classroom mural of the cityscape they photographed on a recent site visit. Their children are not only using a variety of art materials to represent their ideas, they're also building skills to balance the needs and rights of others as they work side by side. Children and family members bring in their recyclable materials to this classroom and practice sorting and classifying their garbage as part of family involvement in the Reduce, Reuse, Recycle study. The children then graphed the most popular types of recyclables that were consumed at home versus at school. And then lastly, while investigating simple machines, the children in this Washington, D.C. class were inspired to create their own inclined planes in the block area. The teacher provided different weighted balls of various sizes and textures for children to experiment with, rolling and pushing them up and down the ramp. Through this interaction during choice time, the teacher was able to introduce the term tilt and invited the children to see the effects that lowering or raising their inclined plane might have on the speed and ease of the objects moving on the ramp. This teacher actually used guidance from one of our intentional teaching cards to engage children in this experience. Designed for ages 3 to 6, the experiences explained in these cards support all areas of development and learning and encourage individualized instruction for all children. Each intentional teaching card shows you how to implement the activity in your classroom and include objectives addressed by the activity, a list of materials, and suggestions to help you include all children. But one of the most exciting and really unique features of these experiences is this color-coding teaching sequence that you see that's included for each activity. For those of you who are familiar with teaching strategies, creative curriculum, or goal by teaching strategies, you'll recognize that these colored bands coincide with the colored bands used in our progressions for development and learning. These colored sequences explain how to individualize a given learning experience to meet the strengths and needs of every child in a classroom. The color coding is only meant to give teachers a starting point for the activity. The way an experience is carried out with a 4-year-old at the end of the year may be very different from how you would use it with a 3-year-old at the beginning of the year. The teaching sequence helps you ensure that every child in your class is having a meaningful experience while engaged in the same activity, even if he's at a different place developmentally. Also note that if teachers are using Gold Plus by teaching strategies, they have the option to see these experiences digitally, with children's names automatically populated along the teaching sequence based on the teacher's most recent observation of a child's knowledge, skills, and behaviors. The teaching sequence helps ensure the activity is meaningful for every child, regardless of his or her developmental level. When teachers individualize their instruction, children are more engaged, motivated, and successful. They learn more, and programs have better outcomes. If you don't have intentional teaching cards yet, with some extra weekly planning time, you can try implementing this strategy on your own. Well, here's what you do. You'll take one of your favorite small group activities, so here's one around rhyming riddles, and then you'll want to review the related progressions for development and learning that you have included in whatever assessments. This is our example from goals. Then you'll want to think about the changes in materials, questions to ask, guidance that you can provide to create a teaching sequence that appropriately will challenge on each level of the related progression. Then you'll review your most current assessment information for the children who will be joining you in the experience and determine where to begin in the sequence that you've just created. When engaging children in the experiences above, not only are we furthering their skill development related to those critical higher level thinking process skills that Kai-leé mentioned earlier, but we're at the same time supporting rich content development across all areas of development and learning. These have been just a few examples of how engaging children in hands-on exploration and investigation can support children in building a wide variety of skills that translate across all areas of development and learning. One final skill that's a huge benefit of project-based investigations is providing children the ongoing opportunity to share their ideas, which Kai-leé will talk about next.
So during the 6 weeks or so of a study, children, teachers, and families celebrate learning in small ways throughout investigations, right? Sharing findings of a tested prediction, displaying graphs, maps, and sculptures along the way as they're created, and thanking guest visitors for sharing their expertise and knowledge all help children stay engaged and encourage further investment in building on their prior knowledge and provide them lots of opportunities to share their ideas. But we also want to think about how we bring closure to the end of a study. It's important to pause at the end of each study to really honor children's hard work and learning. Studies require children to really be engaged thinkers. We should celebrate that. Some teachers have a celebration during which children share their investigations with others in the school, the wider community, and their families. For instance, in concluding a study of signs, children can create their own signs with words and symbols to design a path throughout the school or playground for families and other classrooms in the school to navigate, complete with child-developed intersections where participants have to pay close attention to when it's safe to cross. Or at the end of a clothes study, maybe the class wants to put on a fashion show to celebrate all they learned about clothes construction, hair, and personal fashion preferences. Each study conclusion presents us with an opportunity to help children review and evaluate their work and think of creative ways to present their findings to others. The children's ideas and cues will lead you to the next study. Now, over the years, teachers, administrators, and families have told us about the powerful, positive impact of this approach to instruction. In creating the creative curriculum for preschool, we wanted to support the new and experienced teacher by providing detailed daily resources that help them implement studies in the classroom. It's important for us to choose study topics that are engaging and relevant to all children in different environments. Topics like balls, trees, reduce, reuse, recycle, clothes, and buildings, or some of our newest studies that we're excited to share featuring insects, tubes and tunnels, signs, sand, and simple machines. We'll be hosting some additional webinars over the coming weeks that will take a deeper dive into many resources Teaching Strategies offers to help support you in implementing engaging and content-rich studies in your classroom. If the study approach is new to you, please don't be overwhelmed by everything that we've talked about today. Think big, but start small. If your current approach to instruction is thematic, look for elements of a theme that are appropriate for a mini investigation. For example, if you're using a transportation theme, now take your children outside for a closer look at the cars in your parking lot. The children could tally the different kinds of cars or colors of cars. They could sketch certain features of a car, right? Do that observational drawing that Brian talked about as being so important in the study. They could examine the tires, make rubbings of different treads, and research the reasons that cars have different types of tires. Using cardboard and other found objects, you can work with children to create a replica of a car in the classroom. Now, once you see how engaged children are in their exploration and you observe their development of critical thinking and process skills, you will surely want to provide additional opportunities for a more in-depth study. Remember that your entire day is not devoted to a study. There's still time to touch on relevant seasonal activities. And I saw a question pop up about holidays. There's certainly time in your day to honor those things that are important to your classroom community and your community at large. Things that are happening like birthdays and new children. And for sharing experiences that you have always enjoyed bringing into the classroom, things that are special to you. Right? Because it's the passions that individual teachers and family members contribute. That's what makes each classroom so unique and so special. When implementing studies in our classroom, we can be confident that the children in our care are having a wide range of learning experiences. When the content they're learning is relevant and meaningful, when they have opportunities to direct their learning and actively explore and experiment to find answers to their questions, and when we provide structure and guidance to help them organize their thinking and scaffold their learning, that's when children develop positive approaches to learning. They gain meaningful skills in the content areas, and they develop those critical process skills that are essential to all future learning. And most importantly, they gain confidence in themselves as learners. I almost forgot. Yes, in fact, ants do have teeth. They have many of them, actually. So we are to the point now where we will open it up for questions, hopefully about studies and not about ants.
One comment I wanted to make before we jump into questions is we actually had two different folks that posted into response the impact they've seen of studies on the community and really having community members get more involved in the work that their classroom is doing and the positive impact that's had. So that's great to hear. Pulled a couple of the questions that we've seen throughout. One of the first ones that we actually heard from several folks, Kai-leé, if you want to talk for a minute about doing studies in the 2-year-old classroom or that young threes group that we know the audience of this was really preschool that we've been talking and engaging with, but how does that translate?
Yeah, that special classroom or that wonderful time of year that is the transitional twos, we often call it, right? Where you have your older twos, your younger threes gathered in one room together. That is a wonderfully gifted teacher who teaches that transitional class. I have seen studies be introduced with older 2-year-olds and young threes, but really what you'd be focused on is introducing some of the concepts and skills associated with studies. We've mentioned a couple of times a mini investigation. So taking a topic that they're interested in and going through the structure of a study, but maybe in a shorter period of time, perhaps fewer investigation questions. The kinds of investigations you'll do need to be so much more fluid. We talk in the preschool classroom about planning for possibilities. You always have to be open to what's happening with the children that day, and your children on any given day certainly drive what ends up really taking place with your curriculum, but even more so in a transitional twos classroom. So yes, those process skills, the idea of using children's curiosity to drive the learning, the heart and soul of what a study is, absolutely has a place in that transitional classroom.
One of the other questions I saw that I'll address here is what do studies look like within those routines? I think Kai-leé had mentioned the study's not part of your whole day. When we think about the structure of our day, there's a few times a day when we come together as a full classroom community. So in one of our large groups every day, we really want to talk about that study topic together as a full classroom community and think about those investigation questions, do some shared writing, introduce some new materials or artifacts related to the topic, and then transition into choice time where we let children build on that and build upon the learning that we did as a large group. But if you think about 10 different interest areas in the room that children are engaged with, maybe just in the clothes study, it's in my dramatic play area that I've introduced some of these new things. It's becoming a laundromat. But if I went to the farmer's market yesterday and saw the biggest eggplant I've ever seen in my life, I would still bring that in and put that in the discovery area for children to predict what it might look like inside and gather observational drawings over the course of a few days to then see and draw what's inside. And then related to small group and our transition, sometimes they're about the study topic, sometimes our read-alouds are about the study topic, but as we talked about early, oftentimes it's about just other interests that are happening within the classroom. But then really ending the day too, getting back to that study topic, which one of the other questions was around family involvement. So it's a really great idea to end the day talking about reflection about the study topic, because then that's the last thing that child's remembering. So hopefully when they're engaged with Abuela or whoever's picking them up in the afternoon and are asked, what did you do at school today? It's not, I had a snack, but instead I built a ramp in the area and I made an inclined plane and I know what tilt means now. And those are fresher in their mind to share with families. Kai-leé, did you want to touch any more on the family involvement piece?
Yeah, we mentioned earlier that sometimes families can be your best experts, and it is truly so. So getting to know families well, understanding what their interests are, their hobbies outside of their employment. Families often have some unique skills and talents, and bringing those into the classroom is invaluable, right? It provides children with a sense of belonging. It breaks down that home-school barrier that sometimes can artificially exist, and helps family members to feel important and special and empowered. And sometimes the families we serve don't always have opportunities to feel that way. So there's lots of wonderful ways throughout a study, particularly because we're talking about simple, real-world, relevant objects, relevant topics that really most people will have had some sort of experience with. So there's a good question about, can you repeat study topics? So if you have, let's say, a mixed age classroom of 3s and 4s, and you do the music making study, when the children come back the following year, who are, now in your classroom again for year 2, can you do music making again? And we say absolutely you can, that when you do a study, the group of children as a whole will take it in so many interesting directions. And as Brian mentioned earlier when she was talking about the difference in ages and in developmental progression of children, that the way a 3-year-old will engage with the study topic and ask questions and explore is so different than how a child in the pre-K year will. And of course it depends on the individual child. But it's also nice to have variety, and I think particularly, for me when I was a teacher, I liked being able to vary it and really be able to follow the interests of the classroom. Music making is one of those topics that you probably could do every year, because every year children truly will have genuine interest in that topic. But it's nice to give yourself flexibility. In the creative curriculum, one of the things that's so special about it for me is that you don't have to do the same thing, year over year. You don't have to do the studies in a particular order. You have the flexibility as a teacher to follow the interests of children, follow the rhythm of your community and your classroom community, as well as what you're interested in exploring with children.
and then really start to build on each other. A group that I was working with in Nashville, they did the ball study first, and they ended up going down a path of really talking about sports quite a bit within that, and local sports that were happening, and children's interests, and older siblings involved, and it really lent itself to the exercise study, and it was just this real logical transition. That's not what the teacher had planned to do next. She had great ideas of how they were tying into Earth Day, and in the spring with reduce, reuse, recycle, and so it's interesting, but you really followed that path of really looking to see what children's interests were taking them to that next step. So there were several questions. Fortunately, we weren't able to address today, but we've captured all of them, and we'll have someone reach out to you if we weren't able to answer your question on the call this afternoon. So I wanted to take one more moment to thank you so much for offering some of your time to us today. We know how valuable every moment is within your day, and we appreciate you taking the time to spend with us.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everything you do for young children and their families. Enjoy the rest of your day.